Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, and members of the AfCFTA Secretariat and Council members, Secretariat, staff, and stakeholders. It's such a pleasure for me to be welcoming you today to this webinar, which is focused on the rules of origin in cotton, textiles, and apparel. Today, we are co-hosting this event with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. And as I said earlier, we are co-hosting this webinar with the AfCFTA Secretariat. I'm very, very excited about that and pleased that we have been able to do this together with the Secretariat this time. A little bit about the background to this event. The Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance has been hosting a webinar series over the last 2 years titled the AfCFTA and Transformative Industrialisation. We decided to embark on this path because as we began to partner with the AfCFTA Secretariat in completing the negotiations and implementing the AfCFTA, we began to think about what the challenges countries on the continent would face as they implement. And we thought that we need to focus on how to make the AfCFTA more than just about trade. Because as we all know, trade in itself will not lead to the developmental outcomes that we all need from the AfCFTA. So we decided to focus on other aspects of development, particularly on industrialization, because we thought that as we begin to implement, those countries that are more capable, more industrialized, have a more diversified industrial base, will be in a position to export value-added products to their neighbors and across the African continent. But those who are not very, who are not industrialized yet and who have not yet beneficiated will find challenges. Others may have adjustment costs. So we thought we should make a strong link between the implementation of the AfCFTA and the building of industrial capabilities across the continent. We decided to focus on those priority sectors where there may be better opportunities for African countries to work together, to collaborate, to build their competitiveness, to export to each other, but also to the global market. And it is for this reason that we chose a few sectors like cotton, textiles, and apparel, agriculture and agro-processing, vaccines and pharmaceutical manufacturing on the continent. As you know, COVID-19 has taught us that we need to become more self-sufficient. We need to build health security as well as industrialize on the continent. And so vaccines and manufacturing is also an important sector. Now, as we began to do this work, we built a strong relationship with the AfCFTA Secretariat, and we're very pleased that the Secretary General, Wamkele Mene, decided to work closely with the Mandela School and partner with us in this project. And one of the amazing outcomes of this process was the creation of the AfCFTA Trade and Industrial Development Advisory Council. This council is made up of a number of outstanding experts, intellectuals, policymakers, and policy thinkers on the African continent who have expertise in trade and industrialization. And today we're very pleased that a few of them are on the panel. Jane Ezerigwe, I will introduce in a second. She will be the moderator of the first session. And in the second session, Dr. Dr. Tefere Tesfacho will be a discussant in the second session. Both of them are members of the Advisory Council. I'm also a member of the Advisory Council to the Secretary General, and I'm very, very pleased to be playing this role. So I'd like to now introduce to you Jane Ezerigwe. You may know, some of you may know her. She participated just yesterday in another webinar we had on agriculture and agro-processing on the continent. She is a senior research fellow at NILES. NILES is the Nigerian Institute for Advanced Legal Studies. She teaches at the University of Bingham at Karu University in Nigeria. She has studied at UCT, where she's graduated with a PhD in law. And she has many years of experience in practice and also undertaking research, and her passion is really in agriculture and agricultural policy, trade policy. So I'd like to hand you over to Jane Ezerigwe, who is going to introduce you to the first session and the first set of panelists. We have two sets of panelists today. The first session will be moderated by Jane. I will moderate the second session. In the first session, we will be bringing together the research that we have done on both rules of origin and the cotton textile sector. And we will ask the researchers to give a very brief summary of the research that they have undertaken, and also tell you where you can find the rest of their research. This is very relevant, this research, for the ongoing negotiations currently on the rules of origin in the AfCFTA. In the second session that I will be moderating, I'm very happy to have Mohammed Ali, who is the Director for Trade in Goods in the AfCFTA, present to you the state of play of the negotiations on rules of origin. And we will be in that session drawing on those negotiators and policymakers who are in the audience today to join us in the panel and make a few remarks, providing us with your insights and perhaps engaging with some of the research that will be presented in the first session. So over to you, Dr. Jane Ezerigwe.
Much, Prof, for the warm introduction and for giving us an overview of how the sessions will proceed from here. I'll be moderating this session, like Prof has said, and we have 3 speakers for this session. I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Andrew Mould, after introducing him very briefly. So Dr. Andrew Mould is the Chief Regional Integration and AfCFTA Cluster at the East African Office of the Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, in Kigali. He has a master's in economics and politics of development from the Cambridge University, and a PhD in economics from the Complutense University of Madrid. He has previously worked for the UNECA in Addis Ababa, the UN Secretariat in Chile, and the UNICEF in Costa Rica. He was also a senior economist at the OECD Development Center in Paris. He was the editor of the European Journal of Development Research. He is also the author of 2 books, The EU Development Policy in a Changing World, Challenges for the 21st Century, and The Policy, Ownership and Aid Conditionality in the Light of the Financial Crisis, a Critical Review. He has also published a wide range of journals, including the Journal of African Trade, Journal of International Development, the African Trade Review, and the Journal of Agricultural Economics. Currently, he is the guest editor for the special issue of the Journal of African Trade, the AfCFTA and African Trade. So I welcome Dr. Mould, who will be talking to us on the topic.
Okay, I think my task here basically is to provide an overview of the status of the textile and clothing sector, so we can have some more informed discussions. Let me go very quickly through the presentation because we only have 10 minutes, and I think the idea was actually to leave plenty of space and time for discussion. So just to start with some of the basics of the industry. It is, of course, an industry which satisfies a fundamental human need for clothing, but it's also an industry which is subject to a lot of complex social and cultural forces. And one of those currently is, of course, the fast fashion phenomena, where it's been an important driver of demand over recent decades, and has increased subsequently demand for the sector. Now, the nature of the industry is it's a very low in capital intensity, and labor intensity is high, and that's why it's been so popular in the past for developing countries as a first stage in their strategies towards industrial development. And the technology is relatively unsophisticated and easily replicable. Labor costs tend to be the most significant production factor in the industry. And geographic proximity is also becoming increasingly vital to serve the higher income markets, which are responsible for a large share of global demand. So the graphic to the right here just shows basically the trends in global clothing trade over the last couple of decades, and you can see there's been a very sharp increase in response to rising global demand. Now, with regards to the economic geography of the sector, there's been some really fundamental shifts over the last 6 or 7 decades. OECD producers of textiles and garments shed about 75% of their workforce between the 1950s and the early 2000s in the face of persistently rising imports. And those imports increasingly came from Asia, and we could perhaps go into the reasons for that in the discussions. High-income countries subsequently lost a lot of their workforce, which fell even from 2000 from around 15% to less than 3% of employment. One important characteristic I think to point out as well is the growing concentration in the sector, where large companies tend to monopolize the value chains in these products, in garments and textiles. And one study by McKinsey from a few years ago actually showed that the top 20% of companies were basically monopolizing nearly all the profits in the industry over the decade from 2005 to 2015. So there's a high degree of concentration in the sector. With regard to labor issues, the labor force is principally female. 80% are female, mostly unskilled or semi-skilled and young. Often pay is extremely low in the sector. I think that's a very important factor that we need to be discussing as we move forward with the AfCFTA as well. That low levels of social protection are also quite precarious in the sector. Regulation in the sector has become difficult, partly because of fragmented transitory nature of the industry and the shift in geographic patterns of production. And historically, an important point to stress as well is that governments have intervened heavily in the industry. One of the most well-known restraints, of course, was the multi-fiber arrangement, which went from 1973 to 2005. But even that was actually previously, the US started to actually impose voluntary export restraints on Japanese textile imports as early as the 1950s. The MFA was to create a trade environment in principle which would benefit developed and developing countries, but was essentially a protectionist device on the part of the higher income countries to control the flood of imports coming from Asia. And it became more restrictive as time went on. Now, that was phased out in 2005 and had some dramatic impacts on the industry as well in terms of the downward pressure on prices. With regards to the patterns of global trade now, we're now 17 years after the elimination of the multi-fiber agreement, we can see that the concentration of production in Asia is really quite striking. Around 60% of global exports come from Asia currently. Europe's managed to hang on to a relatively larger share compared to the United States in terms of exports. And it's done that through a number of mechanisms, which could also, I think, come up in the discussions. In terms of imports, we see this concentration in higher income countries in terms of global demand, whereas I mentioned at the beginning, 2/3 of global consumption is accounted for by high income countries. So just to summarize some of these trends in the global markets, which I think will help with the subsequent discussions, there's a lot of concentration of global buying power, which has given Western firms in particular power over the market. Cost and efficiency as well. We've got much more stress on shorter lead times and greater inter-seasonal variability, and logistics and cost has really become king in this industry. So let me now just show you the trends with regards to African exports. Here you can see that continental exports have been increasing over time since the mid-90s, standing currently at around 16 to 18 billion US dollars a year. As a share of the global total, though, we can see that it's been declining from around 3% a decade ago to around 2% now. And it's a very important stylized fact as well. I think we need to stress the concentration of those exports. So North Africa is responsible for about 60% of continental exports, with other major players being South Africa, countries such as Madagascar and Mauritius. On the import side, we've seen a sharper rise in terms of the amount of imports, which have gone up approximately threefold over the same period since 1995. And that's the share of African imports there as well as the blue line, which you can appreciate has also gone up. So with regards to imports, you can see that the distribution is far more evenly distributed. And as a consequence of these trends, you can see that Africa has had a situation which has gone from approximately a balance in trade at a continental level in textiles and clothing to quite large deficits in the last 2 decades. So this is clearly something that the AfCFTA would need to be finding ways to address, this structural trade deficit in textiles and clothing. The cotton sector is a little bit different from the other sectors in the sense that it's managed to hold on to its market share. It's a major seller to the Chinese market, for example, the West African countries producers. So it's done rather better. I won't go into the details here. I think this could come up in the discussions, the peculiarities of the cotton sector, but you can see here from the graphic that actually in terms of percentage share, it's around 20% of the global total of cotton. We need to bear in mind, of course, synthetics have become increasingly popular over time as part of the inputs into the garment industry. So my final comments here really is just to talk about really what the point of departure is for the continent. And here we're talking about reviving an industry, not developing an industry. It's important to stress that back in the 1970s and 80s, actually the African continent still had quite a flourishing industry. And a lot of that industry has been lost over the last 2 or 3 decades. So, for example, Ghana saw an 80% decline in employment in the textile and clothing sector between 1975 and 2000. Zambia saw its workforce decrease sharply. Nigeria lost practically all 200,000 of its workforce that had been working in the textile and clothing industry. So we're talking about a situation where we're talking about revitalizing this industry, bringing it back basically from a situation where it's not been performing as we would like. I think I'd just like to say a final comment here about the preferential market access, because that's been very much an important element in the revival of textile and clothing exports in some sectors. For example, the EBA, the Everything But Arms Agreement to the European Union, and AGOA for countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Madagascar. And the thing that Kaifas and myself stress in our background paper actually is the fact that these agreements haven't achieved a great success in terms of permanence of the improvement in performance in exports. We've seen booms in some countries because of the preferential market access, but they've generally been rather short-lived and rather precarious. So, for example, the case now of Ethiopia, which has been suspended from AGOA, and that's put the Awassa textile clothing export processing zone in a precarious situation. So if you look at the volumes, total volumes under preferential market access under AGOA in the textiles and clothing segment, for example, and compare that with a country like Bangladesh, you will see that Bangladesh is exporting around 30 to 34 billion US dollars of textiles and clothing per year. And under the whole of AGOA, it's fluctuated between 1.4 1.8 billion US dollars. So a very, very large difference in terms of the absolute export capacity between just one Asian country and the whole of the African continent. So I think I'll leave my comments there rather than go through all the slides and all the details, because I think, as I said at the beginning, I think the idea of this session was to leave plenty of space for discussion. But I hope that this overview has provided the next discussants with points for subsequent discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew, for taking us through those very important points. You've given us some things to consider by pointing us to the fact that in the sector, we have mostly women occupying that workforce with extremely low pays, and we should consider that. You've also given us some statistics on the continental exports with the concentration in North Africa, and then the continental imports being more evenly distributed. You also highlighted the opportunities in the preferential market access. Thank you so much for those insightful comments and overview. We'll move quickly to invite the second speaker. The second speaker is Professor Lindsay Whitefield. She is a professor of business and development and the co-director of the Center for Business and Development Studies in the Department of Management, Society and Communication and at the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark. She's a political economist whose research focuses on contemporary challenges to economic development. Her research combines theories within development economics with political science and economic history, and emphasizes how processes of economic development take place within and cannot be understood separate from the global economy. She joined the Copenhagen Business School after 10 years at the Roskilde University and worked previously at the Danish Institute for International Studies and the Oxford University. Currently, she leads the research project, Decent Work and Global Value Chain based industrialization in Ethiopia, funded by the Danish Development Research Council. Topics include economies after colonialism, Ghana and the struggle for power, the politics of African industrial policy, a comparative perspective, as well as the politics of aid, African strategies for dealing with donors. Professor Lindsay will be taking us on the topic, global trends in the cotton, textile, and apparel sector, and the windows of opportunities and policy tools. So I want to invite Prof to please give us her comments on the windows of opportunities and policy tools in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I was asked to talk about global trends, which really picks up where Andrew left off. As Faisal said, I should tell you where you can find the research I added to the slide at the bottom my personal webpage where all my publications are listed. You can also just put my name and Copenhagen Business School in Google and it will come up right away. So before I talk about global trends in terms of looking forward, I want to make 4 points which come out of research that I've been doing over the last 8 years on the textile and apparel sector, which we can also refer to as the apparel global value chain or the global fashion industry, which emphasizes that around the world, textile and apparel sectors are integrated into these global value chains. The first point I want to make is that the key driver of industrialization has been textile production and not apparel production. As Andrew said, wages are quite low in apparel. If we look even back from the British Industrial Revolution, but going through Japan, through rest of East Asia and many countries, which I outline in a report for Sarshi, it's been textile, because textile was where technological innovations have taken place, where firms have built organizational capabilities, created broader economic linkages in the economy, and led to intersectoral spillovers. So that's why I'm going to focus on building textile and integrated textile industries in sub-Saharan Africa. There's no way that remaining in cut, make, trim assembly is going to drive industrialization on the continent, whether you're looking at national, regional, or continental levels of economies. The second point I want to make is we really need to think in terms of catalyzing integrated textile industries for the 21st century. I would actually disagree a little bit with my colleague Andrew that we are not reviving in textile industries that were built in the 1960s or before. We actually need to think in terms of creating new textile industries fit for the 21st century. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of global trends. The third point, which I talked about in a previous roundtable, but I want to make, because I'm not going to talk specifically about rules of origin, but we know from historical experience that rules of origin on their own will not drive integrated textile industries. I would argue that that was not the experience in most countries, and in the countries where they seem to have played a big role, which include Mauritius and Sri Lanka, the counterfactual is probably on their own, they would not have done that. That actually what drove textile industries in these two countries were foreign partnerships with global buyers, particularly in Sri Lanka with US and European buyers who made co-investments and joint ventures, and in Mauritius, foreign partnerships with Hong Kong apparel firms. And that Mauritian investors and local firms took over many Hong Kong fabric companies that already existed. So if we think that rule of origins are going to drive integrated textile industries because they did in these two countries, I think we need to look at the history quite differently. And the fourth point, which sort of sets the tone for why I'm going to say what I'm going to say, is that regional value chains from an economic history point of view have not driven industrialization. They have not been a stepping stone to global value chains. Actually, it's the other way around. Participation in global export markets have been fundamental since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in every single country that we look through. And this is because they provide a larger demand, accessing global markets where purchasing power is higher, which drives economies of scale. But equally or more important, that they are necessary to leverage foreign knowledge that is needed to build the capabilities of local firms. And that it's actually through participating in global markets and accessing this cutting edge knowledge, adapting it, and then even innovating on it is what drives industrialization and then has spillovers into regional value chains. So these are some of my fundamental starting premises, which may differ from some of the ideas that many people in this roundtable have. So I just wanted to spell those out quickly and would be glad to elaborate. And they are also elaborated in my publications. I'm going to talk about two global trends. So Andrew set the scene on how we got where we are and what we have seen over the last decade. I would argue that we are in the process of a major shift in the apparel global value chain, which I call the sustainability shift. And this is driven by the recognition of climate change and that most industries in the world as they exist now are not sustainable, that we are overriding planetary boundaries on all 4 or 5 levels. And the global fashion industry is seen to be, and rightly so, one of the biggest polluting industries. It actually has global greenhouse emissions equal to maritime shipping and international flights combined, something people don't think about, but is beginning to affect the reputation of the global fashion industry, and it's a huge source of water pollution. Here I just have a breakdown of consumption, production, and the brand, and we can see that most of these greenhouse gases are coming through raw material production and fabric production. So they're in the global supply chain. They're not in the sections owned by global brands and retailers, and actually interesting, consumer end use accounts for a large part of the negative impact on the environment as well. But because a large percentage of the negative impact on the environment is coming from material production and fabric production and textile, global brands and retailers are now seeking to do something about that. They want to reduce their climate impact in global supply chains, but they're also trying to use it to create competitive advantage against each other. And some firms are going beyond greenwashing and actually investing in new technologies and inputs, production processes, and recycling. And this means, and as they do this and are successful in it, they will force other global brands and retailers to do the same. The result is that buyers are going to be looking for suppliers that can help them realize this new sustainable and circular business model. And I would argue that, a bit like John Matthews does, that green industrialization will just become industrialization, that sustainable production will become the new norm. And this is why I argue that we should not think about sub-Saharan African countries as rebuilding old industries, but creating new ones. What has happened is that sub-Saharan African countries missed the technological shift in the 70s, in the 80s and 90s, having old technology. And that if we don't think about creating textile industries fit for the 21st century, that sub-Saharan African countries will miss this technological shift again and still be behind. And so some people may say, oh, leapfrogging, that's a choice. African countries could choose to leapfrog over brown industrialization into green industrialization. I would argue the opposite. I don't think it's a choice. I think it's a necessity. The only way that they're going to industrialize is to be competitive in international markets and to be at as close as possible to the frontier of technology and industries. If they just keep getting, at the bottom rung of industries as they move forward, this is not going to drive increasing wealth and income and standard of living in African countries. The second, it got mixed up. The second trend is nearshoring, which is partly driven by COVID, but also by developments in Asia and particularly China. COVID just sort of made these existing realities clearer to businesses, but shipping textiles from China is getting increasingly expensive. And so buyers are looking for ways to nearshore. They're not going to be reshoring, but they'll definitely be nearshoring. And right now they're looking at Turkey. So of course, this offers a great window of opportunity for sub-Saharan Africa, which is very close to Europe. But even the US is looking at Turkey as an alternative to Latin America. But what we see from this recent report by McKinsey is that while buyers would like to do this, this production capacity doesn't yet exist. So there is definitely an opportunity there if sub-Saharan African countries can become new supplier countries, if they can have this capacity, if they can meet social compliance and human rights, if they provide the kind of raw materials, because they could outcompete, I think, Turkey in this process. However, buyers are also seeking to consolidate their supplier base, and they're seeking suppliers that will have vertical integration, that will be at the state of the art in terms of digitalization, that will be able to do small batches as well as large batches, and that have factories in multiple locations, which hedge risks if something happens in one country. So these are the two broad trends. You can read more about them in this publication and the other one. So what I wanted to look a little bit more about, if we think about the sustainability shift, is what opportunities it opens for green industrialization. So here we're looking at the shift to green energy. Most of the global greenhouse gases in textile production come from the use of brown energy, but also there are opportunities for creating waste management systems, which is a manufacturing sector and has new technologies in and of itself, leading to types of industrial symbiosis, eco-industrial parks, but also different types of raw materials. So in the report that I showed you here, they put a survey to chief purchasing officers about what they plan to do. And you can see that 1 in 3 say they plan to source 90% of their products to be made from sustainable fibers by 2025, and 21% aim to replace at least 30% of virgin with recycled. This means we also can't create integrated textile sectors in sub-Saharan Africa based on plain cotton. There is going to be a clear shift to organic cotton, and there's a huge market in this because India supplies half the global demand, but it's recently been shown that actually most of that is not organic cotton. So we see a global demand and limited supply. There's a turn to other types of virgin materials that use less energy, such as hemp, but also to types of cellulose fibers that involve a manufacturing process that is in itself increasingly sustainable. And then eventually we'll see a turn away from virgin raw materials altogether to recycled materials. And there's huge investments at the moment in chemical recycling technologies, recycling secondhand clothes and plastic waste. So all of this sets a scene for
Lindsay,
what would
could
be,
you move your slides, please?
Yes. All of this sets a scene for the opportunities that are available, but also what would integrated textile have to look like in the 21st century? So the last slide is just to make
You haven't moved your slide, please.
Oh, well, I have on mine. Okay. Ah, you didn't see any of them?
No.
Okay. So
Just
this is the sustainability. Yeah. This was, what? Oh, now I've stopped sharing.
Lindsay?
Oh, you've
I've
taken it.
stepped in, yeah. So is this the slide you're talking to now?
No, I'm on the last slide, but just so this was a sustainability shift. You can go to the next slide.
So this is in the version you sent me, that's the last slide, but is this where you want to be now? Can you see that?
No, the last slide.
That one.
Yeah.
The one that says building competitive textile industries. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Can everyone see that slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great.
I think there's I have two computers up and they're showing different slides on the screen. So I think that's the problem. But it doesn't matter that you couldn't see the slides. I basically went over the key points that we have these global trends towards sustainability. They will have to use green energy. They will use different types of raw materials. There are opportunities for reshoring. Buyers are looking for suppliers that can meet their sustainable and circular economy business models, right? So they want organic cotton, they want other types of virgin resources, and they increasingly want recycled resources. And both alternative cellulose and recycling are actually in and of themselves manufacturing processes. Eco-industrial parks and industrial symbiosis also involve a whole range of manufacturing processes around them, which create new opportunities for green industrialization. So that's the context of the 21st century in which sub-Saharan African countries need to build back better integrated textiles. So the last point is to think about how to do this. And I know I'm out of time now, so I'm not going to go into detail, but I just want to give you the sort of bullet points, the sort of 1, 2, 3, skipped 4, and that come out of looking at how other countries have done this. And the first and most important thing is to say, this has to be done by leveraging foreign knowledge. It's not just normal forms of FDI that you think about, but very different types of partnerships that can happen with foreign firms that basically result in leveraging foreign knowledge and frontier technology, and that this is actually necessary to crowd in local firms, I would argue, both history and looking at Ethiopia's experience. That you have to start from the buyer and move down the value chain. This is what I call the Ethiopia model. So you target buyers who then encourage their foreign apparel supplier firms and accessory providers, and you focus on agglomeration, which reduces lead time and leads to more capture in the country itself. So this is what Ethiopia did. You aim for a cluster of textile, apparel, and accessory firms operating together in eco-industrial parks that are built to plug and play, so firms don't have to make huge investments or take 5 years to start. And you actually go from buyer to product to supplier so that you have clusters of particular types of products. And if we think of that in terms of new eco raw materials, that will be important to go from what do buyers want, what are those products demanded, what type of textile do you need, and then what type of raw material would that need. And then I argue you could take this Ethiopia model to the regional level, that you could coordinate these investments across countries in the West Africa region, in the East Africa region, and the Southern Africa region, because it's impossible to build a completely diversified textile base in small countries. China has done it, Turkey has done it to some extent, but African countries are too small. So you need to use regional blocks to diversify which country is going to have this kind of textile with this kind of raw material, and their neighboring country can have a different, and then they trade and they create regional agglomerations. And this also results in spreading manufacturing capabilities across countries, instead of having one country as a raw material producer, the other as a textile producer, the other as an assembler, and the other as a retail market, which is basically what you have in Southern Africa right now, and it doesn't spread manufacturing capabilities.
If you have 1 minute to go, please.
Yes. So I think in doing this, there's definitely scope to leverage knowledge and investments from Mauritian firms, which is the most advanced integrated textile producing country in sub-Saharan Africa. But also Mauritian firms are looking for ways to innovate, and they need to move into new areas of operation to remain competitive in the existing global value chain. And there's a report on this recently done by ECA. So there's definitely room for linkages there, that Mauritian firms can make investments in other countries, and that they can work together in new types of textile production. And then also linking these textile producers to raw material producers, because they need to work coordinated. We've seen this to be the case in India, where these clusters work quite well in terms of research and development and design. Of course, we'll need certified organic systems, and there will need to be foreign partnerships and government incentives to move into these new innovative areas. And there's a whole literature on what kind of industrial policies can work in this area. So just to conclude and to highlight how this approach may be fundamentally different than the ways that many people are thinking, I argue that you have to leverage GVC participation to build competitive national and regional value chains, and even to build high capability local firms. That rules of origin policies will not actually matter that much with this approach, because double transformation is essential to the approach itself. When you create, it creates in and of itself national and regional industries that are internationally competitive. So tariffs don't really matter so much. And if with this kind of approach creates a lot of jobs that increase incomes through the linkages and spillover effects, and that higher purchasing power will lead to falling demand for secondhand clothes, and more jobs, including unskilled jobs, will replace livelihood strategies. So you also don't have to worry about banning secondhand clothes, because the creation of the dynamic industry in itself will do that for you. Thank you very much, and sorry that I didn't flip my slides at the beginning.
Thank you, Prof, for that insightful session. You started by letting us know your point of departure before highlighting the fact that sustainability shift is being experienced in the sector at the moment and the opportunities in the green industrialization for the 21st century. That should be our focus. We are running out of time, so we'll quickly move to the third speaker. I'd like to encourage the participants to please put their questions in the chat box. I can see a few questions there, but we could take a few questions at the end of this session. Let me quickly introduce the third speaker, Dr. Kafias Chekwoti. He's the head of TRAPCA. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Dar es Salaam. He has over 25 years experience in training at the university level and has been involved in international trade policy training for over 10 years. Before joining TRAPCA, he was previously a lecturer of economics at the Makerere University, Uganda. Prior to teaching, he was an economist in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, Uganda. He has been involved in various researches and consultancies on trade policy as well as development issues. His research interests include trade reforms, trade in service, innovation, and firm competitiveness. Dr. Kafias will be taking us on applicable rules of origin, lessons learned from approaches by industry and governments, and the utilization of rules of origin. Dr. Kafias, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I think my contribution is just to build on the insights that Andrew provided and what Lindsay has quite elaborated, especially in the last slide, with the making the argument that yes, rules of origin are important, but it's not everything. It's not a magic bullet to ensuring that we get regional value chains take off, particularly in textile and clothing. So we make then the argument that yes, getting the rules of origin right is important because then it is that complementary rule that then sends signals to investment actors, particularly in the industry, to be able then to see how to leverage on that and make investments that could trigger vertical integration, for example, in the industry. What of course we notice that if the rules of origin are quite strict and excessive, yes, there's then a possibility that some of the state parties, for example, with limited capacity and the requisite investment to address supply side constraints, may find it a little bit tricky for them to be able to produce a product that can meet the strict rules of origin, and of course, may not be able to benefit from that market access with the that kind of package. We've seen that, for example, I think my colleagues mentioned that in the presentation with respect to the everything but arms for a number of the African countries. We also saw that with AGOA when the rule was relaxed, and that made it possible for a number of the AGOA beneficiary countries to be able to access that market with the more relaxed rules of origin. But of course, we also note that yes, if it is relaxed, yeah, it may make it easy for investors who probably are market seeking and they may want to access that particular market to be able to focus their investment on just meeting the minimum with respect to the rules of origin, for example, single transformation, maybe just from fabric to apparel, imported fabric to apparel, if they can meet that, following the cut, make, and trim, then they'll be able to access that particular market. But we also know that that itself has its own implications. It may not necessarily nurture value addition and vertical integration within the industry. And we also note that, yes, if then the requirement is to have a two-stage, not like double transformation, for example, say from yarn to fabric, then from fabric to apparel, or from cotton itself, then all the way to apparel, triple transformation. That obviously would be a rule that will make sure that all the investors who are in the textile and clothing industry are more likely than, if they are going to meet that rule, to invest in nurturing a vertically integrated industry. But we also know that then that can only be possible if then there is a requisite investment, probably proactive industrial policy supported by the government to address the supply side binding constraints. If those are not addressed, then it may be too costly for the investors, and they may not see the possibility for them to be able to make a margin and, of course, have a product that's competitive. Yeah, so we've seen that worked for some of the countries. For example, Bangladesh was able to fulfill the condition, but then the government had to proactively provide incentives, provide investments to address infrastructural constraints, to then support the investors, and particularly, like Lindsay Akel mentioned, with the partnerships with a foreign firm, that then with coupled with the investments to address the supply side constraints, that made it much easier for the entities to be able to nurture a value-added textile industry to transformation and the initial EBA requirement. And in that way, they were able to produce a competitive product. So we then, of course, see that, yes, in a single transformation, a more flexible rule of origin, there's a possibility that investors could easily be attracted, especially the market-seeking ones. But we've also seen that that could easily lead to a theft of intellectual property rights. For example, we've seen Chinese-made or Dutch waxed fabric that imitates the West African fabrics, such as the Virgin wooden, and that in itself may not be within the context of what we are looking for as we focus on the AfCFTA. Triple transformation obviously makes the argument, and we try to examine that in our paper, that yes, we have a number of the countries that actually produce the cotton. Yeah, there are a number of issues that have been highlighted by Lindsay with respect to whether it's organic or not, and of course, the need to focus on environmental dimensions. Yes, but then there are those countries with that kind of capacity. So it would then make a lot of sense that as we look at the continental-wide integration of the industry, it should be feasible to have cotton that then is processed to yarn, and then from yarn to fabric and to apparel, but probably with different segments of that value chain in different countries, depending on the extent to which there are already industrial capabilities in these particular countries to be able to handle the different segments. So we see that as something that is feasible. But given just the insight that we have already had from Andrew with respect to the trends, and also from Lindsay with respect to the dimensions regarding the textile and clothing industry, particularly for Africa as a continent, we see that there are differences. There's heterogeneity in terms of the capabilities, industrial capabilities, to be able then to foster, for example, value addition segments to enable a competitively produced product in different countries. And since that those capabilities that then vary from country to country, some countries are better off, some others still have significant capacity challenges with the still lagging industrial development in terms of investment to address the supply side constraints. we argue in our paper that there could be merit in considering different customized rules at some heading level, maybe even at tariff line level, allowing then a number of the state parties to have some kind of elbow room to accommodate the various positions that state parties would be pushing forward, ranging from those state parties that are cotton producers and of course would want triple transformation from cotton all the way to those ones that then do not have that capability and are still at a low industrial base to be able to produce a competitive product. So then there's that kind of flexibility. Yeah, there are a number of examples I think that have come out from Andrew's presentation and also Lindsay's presentation to be able to affirm this. So what then becomes clear is that yes, and of course this resonates with the presentation and the last points from Lindsay, whether it is double or triple transformation, that is not necessarily the main key to ensuring that then we're able to foster regional value chains in textile and clothing. But it should be complemented by a proactive industrial policy that then specifies the key investments required to build capabilities, particularly from the input side. Yeah. And of course, also capabilities that then would lower logistics costs to be able to move some of the intermediates across in different states for that to make the final product, the apparel, for example, to be cost effective and competitive, like Lindsay actually put it. I mean, that's the only way then somebody who at the moment is not able to afford a brand new apparel and they rely mainly on secondhand, maybe convinced to be able to go for a brand new one. So we see then the need to focus on incorporating technology, which is actually quite dynamic in the sector, industrial upgrading, focusing on capabilities in terms of fashion, of course, incorporating e-commerce, for example, the accessibility to finance, market intelligence, agglomeration, and a number of those insights that Lindsay presented in her final slide, or of course, including the skills to be able to then get high value products in textile and clothing. So what then we probably may want to conclude in this aspect to just complement the presentations from my colleagues is that yes, investment is key, particularly in capabilities required to then enable whichever rules of origin is actually adopted, and we'll be saying could be a differentiated approach to this in order to drive value addition in textile and clothing. So we see that as something that probably needs to be taken into account even when the rules of origin negotiations go on within this particular industry. So there's clearly a role for governments, proactive industrial policy. There is need for active sector promotion. And of course, like Lindsay actually mentioned, a number of our state parties are relatively small economies. So this agglomeration and a regional-wide approach may actually make a lot of sense. And probably that could also be feasible in addressing some of the supply side constraints that make the industry or the products from the industry uncompetitive. So basically that's what I wanted to add as an overview with respect to the rules of origin. Thank you so much, moderator.
Thank you so much, Doc, for taking us through those very important points. You cautioned us on excessive and rigid rules of origin and highlighted the intellectual property issues in relaxed rules of origin. You went ahead to say that investment is key, especially emphasizing that capabilities that lower logistic costs must be are invested in. They highlighted the roles of governments. I think we've come to the end of this session.
It's really such a pleasure to have listened to three outstanding presentations on the state of play of Africa on trade in particularly cotton and textiles. Andrew Mole gave us, I think, an excellent overview. In a few minutes, he was able to capture for us the trends in trade. He showed us who are the main exporters of cotton, textiles, and apparel. And he also did give us an understanding of the strength and the capacity of the African cotton textile sector, pointing to really the decline of the sector from the 70s and 80s, and what he called the need to rebuild, revitalize the industry. Lindsay Whitaker gave us an outstanding account of the current global trends, saying that, well, we should perhaps be talking about building back better this time, because we have a new opportunity to build our industries to meet the new conditions or the new trends in the global economy on cotton textiles, driven increasingly by what she called the sustainability shift that's taking place, the concern by consumers in the big markets, the EU, the US, Japan, about climate change. And those countries who can make that shift the quickest, and Africa certainly can leapfrog into these new methods of production, new technologies that are going to be required to produce in a greener way, more sustainable way. So that, I think, gave us an important understanding of what we will need to do as we design the process of integration on the African continent. Caiaphas Chikwete gave us, I think, an excellent presentation summarizing what the rules of origin, what the role of the rules of origin are generally in trade agreements, the different types of agreements, single, double, triple transformation. So the rules can be either very relaxed or they can be very strict. And he has proposed that perhaps we need to take a very pragmatic approach, because if you go in one extreme or the other extreme, that has implications for countries on the African continent who may be at different stages of production. And all the speakers, I think, have stressed the need for collaboration and cooperation between African countries, because we are too small and we can only grow and industrialize and become competitive if we work together, we collaborate. And so the AfCFTA is indeed a real game changer. It provides an incredible opportunity for Africa to industrialize. And so the question is, how can African countries negotiating in the AfCFTA design a rule of origin that facilitates industrialization, noting that the rule, whatever rule it is that we agree on its own, is no savior. It's not a solution on its own. It will need to be supported. It will need to be complemented by smart industrial policies that build the necessary capabilities and attract the investment that we need from abroad and domestically to support the building of capacity. So that's the question we're really looking at right now. And we wanted someone from the Secretariat. We had the Secretariat providing us with their Director of Goods, Trade in Goods, Mohammed Ali. He was due to make the presentation. Unfortunately, he's traveling today and can't speak, but his colleague, Didier Boniem, who is an expert on rules of origin, working in the AfCFTA Secretariat, will give us a very brief account of the state of play of the negotiations in the AfCFTA. So Didier, if you could please take the floor and make your presentation, that would be great.
Il nous a été demandé de faire une présentation sur l'état des lieux des règles d'origine sur les textiles et leur implication sur la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Et donc, dans ce cadre, nous allons faire une présentation qui va s'articuler autour de 3 points principaux. Le premier point, c'est un bref aperçu des négociations sur l'appendice 4. Juste signaler qu'il y a 2 types de règles d'origine dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Nous avons les règles générales qui sont contenues dans l'annexe 2 et puis des règles spécifiques sont contenues dans l'appendice 4. Et donc, lorsqu'on parle des règles d'origine sur les textiles dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, on fait allusion à l'appendice 4. Donc, nous allons donner un bref aperçu.
Didier, could you please give us a second? We're just going to check whether we have translation into English. Abner, is that possible to translate from French to English?
Yes, it is, but I think we are having a challenge with the interpreters. So if you can just give me 1 minute, I'll just check on them and then I'll get back to you.
All right, not a problem. Thank you very much, Didier. And just perhaps if you could just be patient for a minute or two. This looks like a fascinating presentation, so I'm sure it is going to be worth it. Didier is from the Congo, and he is an expert really on the rules of origin with a lot of experience and is intricately involved in the current negotiations that are taking place in the AfCFTA. We know that this is very complex. The question of the rules of origin is one that the negotiators at the moment are, debating amongst themselves. And what we try to do in this session today is something unique, because we brought together the negotiators and researchers who are working not only on the trade, but also on industrialization. So we can have, a discussion which combines the knowledge we have about the state of production on the African continent and the trends. And I think what we've heard today, a fascinating account from Lindsay Whitfield about where the market is going, where the global markets are going. And she didn't speak much about this, but I have read her work on the state of production in Africa. And she's written a fabulous paper, and I'm sure we're going to be giving you the references to those research papers about production in different countries. So we know right now what Mauritius is producing, what Madagascar is producing, how many companies are producing, and whether it's which end of the value chain, whether it's in textiles and in cotton and in apparel components. And she's done that for a number of countries, all the key countries across the continent. So we have a good picture of what's happening on the continent. And we learned a little bit about the rules of origin and how the rules have been applied elsewhere in other regions of the continent. Abner, are you ready?
A minute more.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, not a problem. So yeah, no, we're very happy we're getting this translation. So because it means that more people will have access to the discussion of today. So I have also written a paper which has come out also in the last few days, which links these different pieces of research together. The work on trade and trade flows, on the role of rules of origin, and drawing on Lindsay's work on the state of production on the African continent. And then, of course, it links this to the question that we have been very concerned with in all these webinars we've been hosting, which is how can the AfCFTA facilitate the building of industrialization? How can it facilitate it? Of course, on its own, trade on its own, we know will not deliver development. And the AfCFTA on its own cannot stimulate industrialization, but how can it facilitate it and support, and is supported by other complementary policies? That is industrial policy and infrastructure, investment in infrastructure, logistics, trade facilitation. These are all issues which will have to be addressed, which the AfCFTA has a role in, but not the only role. It's not the only player. It will need to be complemented by a number of policies at national level especially, but also at regional level. Okay, great stuff. So thank you so much. Didier, you may proceed. We now have translation, so you can follow the instructions that was provided to you, and we'll hear the presentation in English as well. Please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, professeur. Comme je le disais tantôt, notre présentation va s'articuler autour de 3 points. Le premier point consistera à donner un bref aperçu des négociations sur les règles d'origine de l'appendice 4. Et comme je le disais, lorsqu'on fait allusion aux règles d'origine sur les textiles, dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange continentale, on fait donc allusion aux règles d'origine de l'appendice 4, parce que c'est l'appendice 4 qui donne les règles d'origine spécifiques, alors que l'annexe 2 donne les règles d'origine générale. Donc, nous allons donner un aperçu des négociations, mais en se focalisant sur les règles d'origine de l'appendice 4. Ensuite, nous allons donner l'état des lieux des règles d'origine sur le textile, mais des règles d'origine qui sont en suspens. Et enfin, nous allons donner l'implication par rapport à la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Et donc, sans plus tarder, nous pouvons passer au premier point, qui est un bref aperçu des négociations sur l'appendice 4. Abna. J'espère qu'Abna va me suivre. OK. Et donc, pour faire court, nous pouvons synthétiser les négociations sur les règles d'origine de l'appendice 4 en 4 grandes étapes. La première étape commence à partir d'octobre 2017 jusqu'à juillet 2018, où il a été question lors de la 7e réunion du forum de négociation tenue à Addis Abeba de proposer le texte de l'annexe 2 sur les règles d'origine. Donc, comme je le dis, dans le cadre de la structure de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, à part l'accord, nous avons des protocoles. Après les protocoles, nous avons les annexes. Après les annexes, nous avons les appendices. Et donc, dans le cadre des règles d'origine, les premières négociations ont consisté à proposer l'annexe 2. Et une fois qu'on a terminé avec l'annexe 2, on a attaqué maintenant, l'annexe 2 a donné les règles d'origine générale. Et après avoir conclu les règles d'origine générale, on a commencé les travaux sur l'appendice 4. Et les travaux sur l'appendice 4 ont commencé à partir de la deuxième étape, la phase 2, qui est allée de juillet 2018 à décembre 2020. Et donc, pendant cette phase, il y a deux grandes étapes aussi qu'il faut retenir. C'est que la première phase, c'est la conclusion des règles d'origine en vue du sommet de Niamey. Et ceux qui connaissent le processus de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine savent que c'est à Niamey en 2019, en juillet 2019, qu'on a lancé la phase opérationnelle de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Et pour se préparer à cette phase opérationnelle, justement, on a conclu un pourcentage de 71% des règles d'origine pour ce faire. Et après Niamey 2019, on a continué les négociations jusqu'à atteindre en décembre 2020 81,8% des lignes tarifaires. Ensuite, de décembre 2020 au 9 octobre 2021, on a commencé la troisième phase. 9 octobre 2021, s'il faut le rappeler, c'est la date à laquelle on a tenu un conseil, s'est tenu le conseil des ministres, une réunion très importante pendant laquelle on a pu aboutir à des acquis importants qui ont permis de faire passer le pourcentage de 81% à 86%. C'est pour ça que nous mentionnons cela. Et lors de cette importante réunion, l'état des lieux des règles d'origine, c'est important de le mentionner, merci Apna, a révélé les nombres de lignes tarifaires suivantes qui sont restées en suspens à partir de cette étape-là. On a atteint 87,65%, mais 12,35% des règles d'origine étaient encore en suspens. Et le tableau nous donne justement les règles d'origine par ligne tarifaire et par chapitre. Nous avions le chapitre 17 avec 13 lignes tarifaires avec un pourcentage de 241% des lignes tarifaires. Pour faire bref, on peut juste dire que dans l'ensemble des lignes tarifaires, les 12,35% qui sont restés, le chapitre 52 du coton prend 119 lignes tarifaires, ce qui donne 2,209%, suivi du chapitre 62 avec 112 lignes tarifaires, ce qui donne 2,079%. En troisième position, le chapitre 61 avec 106 lignes tarifaires, ce qui donne 1,968%. Et en quatrième position, le chapitre 55 avec 58 lignes tarifaires, ce qui donne 1,077%. Donc, en d'autres termes, ces quatre chapitres, le 52, le 55, le 61 et le 62, mis ensemble, donnent plus de 50% des lignes tarifaires à conclure dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Donc, c'est ça le point important que nous pouvons retenir à ce niveau. Mais en termes de secteur, il est important aussi, même si nous parlons du coton, de dire que sur les lignes tarifaires qui restent à conclure, le secteur des textiles représente 568 lignes tarifaires, ce qui donne 75,63% des lignes tarifaires à conclure, suivi du secteur automobile avec 77 lignes tarifaires, ce qui donne 1,43% des lignes à conclure, et les autres secteurs donnent 1,97% des lignes à conclure. Donc, c'est pour vous montrer l'importance du secteur textile dans la conclusion des règles d'origine de la zone de libre-échange continentale. Et cela nous permet d'aller au troisième point de notre exposé. Au deuxième point de notre exposé, qui consiste à l'état des lieux de règles d'origine en suspens sur les textiles. Mais étant donné que le document que nous utilisons est un peu volumineux, nous avons préféré le faire en Word. Mais rassurez-vous, nous allons juste vous donner un aperçu. Vous l'aurez en annexe, l'aperçu des règles d'origine qui sont en suspens et qui concernent le secteur textile. Nous avons le chapitre 51, mais d'aucuns peuvent nous poser la question, mais comment on commence au chapitre 51? C'est vrai que les règles d'origine qui concernent le textile partent du chapitre 50 au chapitre 63, mais juste signaler que le chapitre 50 est déjà conclu. Donc, on commence à partir du chapitre 51. Il y a le 51.11 et 51.13 qui restent en suspens, et les règles d'origine proposées jusque-là, c'est le changement de position tarifaire et le processus spécifique. Nous avons le chapitre 52. Le chapitre 52, avec un certain nombre de lignes à conclure, le 52.04, 52.07, avec comme règle proposée le changement de position tarifaire, avec une limitation sur le coton du 52.01, 52.03. En d'autres termes, la règle proposée, c'est le changement de position tarifaire, mais à condition que le coton des chapitres 52.01 et jusqu'à 52.03 soit entièrement obtenu. La deuxième règle proposée, c'est le changement de position tarifaire simple. Et la troisième règle, c'est la valeur ajoutée de 40%. Comme nous l'avions dit précédemment, c'est le chapitre 52 concernant le coton qui couvre le plus grand nombre de lignes tarifaires qui restent en suspens. Ensuite, il y a le chapitre 53 avec juste une ligne tarifaire, c'est le 53.09, et les règles proposées sont le processus spécifique et le changement de position tarifaire. Nous avons le chapitre 54 aussi, avec comme règle proposée le changement de position tarifaire et le processus spécifique. Le chapitre 55, j'en parlais tout de suite en disant que c'est le chapitre qui vient en 4e position en termes de position tarifaire à conclure dans le cadre des textiles. Et là, nous avons comme règle proposée le changement de position tarifaire, le processus spécifique avec limitation sur le coton du 52.01 à 52.07, ou en d'autres termes, le coton du 52.01 à 52.07 doit être entièrement obtenu, même si on va utiliser la règle de processus spécifique. Et la troisième règle qui est proposée, c'est le processus spécifique. Ensuite, c'est le chapitre 58. Chapitre 58, il y a quelques produits, mais on peut résumer ça en 4 plages. La première plage, c'est du 58.01 et 58.02, avec comme règle le changement de position tarifaire, le processus spécifique avec limitation sur le coton du 52.01 à 52.07. Et la 4e règle, c'est le changement de position tarifaire avec limitation sur le coton du 52.01 au 52.07. La deuxième plage, c'est du 58.03 au 58.04, où on a, comme précédemment, le changement de position tarifaire, mais combiné au processus spécifique. Ensuite, on a le processus spécifique avec limitation, le changement de position tarifaire avec limitation et le changement de position tarifaire. Donc, il y a 5 règles proposées pour le 5803 au 5804. Pour le 5806, nous avons 2 règles proposées, le changement de position tarifaire, le changement de position tarifaire avec limitation. 5810, nous avons le changement de position tarifaire, le changement de position tarifaire avec limitation, et puis le processus spécifique. Ensuite, on a le chapitre 60, c'est l'un des chapitres les plus importants aussi. Et on a 4 règles proposées, le changement de position tarifaire, le processus spécifique avec limitation et le changement de position tarifaire avec limitation. Le chapitre 61, comme nous l'avons dit, c'est le 2e chapitre le plus important en termes de règles en suspens. Et là, nous avons comme règle proposée le changement de position tarifaire, la valeur des matières non originaires. 3e, le processus spécifique. 4e, le processus spécifique avec limitation. On a le chapitre 62 avec comme règle proposée le changement de position tarifaire, le processus spécifique et le processus spécifique avec limitation. Ensuite, on a le chapitre 63, le dernier chapitre, avec 4 plages, 6301 à 6303. Nous avons la valeur des matières non originaires à 47,5% ou 60%. On a 2e, le changement de position tarifaire. 3e, le processus spécifique. 4e, le processus spécifique avec limitation sur le coton du chapitre 5, des positions 5201 à 5207. Le 6304 et 6305, on a les mêmes règles que la première plage, mais en plus, il y a la proposition sur l'entière obtention. Le 6306, là, nous avons la valeur des matières non originaires, soit à 47,5% ou à 60%, le changement de position tarifaire, le processus spécifique et le processus spécifique avec limitation sur le coton du 5201 à 5207. Et puis, nous avons le 6309 et 6310, où nous avons le changement de position tarifaire, la valeur ajoutée, et certains ne proposent pas de règles pour les friperies et les articles usagés, les articles textiles usagés. Donc, globalement, ce sont les règles qui sont en suspens dans le cadre de l'appendice 4. Cela nous permet justement de chuter et de conclure sur les implications par rapport à la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. En fait, l'objectif des 2 premiers chapitres, c'était de vous situer un peu par rapport à la problématique des règles d'origine et de leur implication dans la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Juste vous dire que nous devons Je voulais conclure, si vous permettez, juste 1 minute pour conclure.
OK.
Je voulais conclure en disant que, au regard des règles d'origine sur les textiles en suspens, si nous voulons atteindre les objectifs de la zone de libre-échange continentale qui sont repris à l'accord dans ces articles 3F et 3G qui promeuvent les chaînes de valeur et l'industrialisation, nous devons absolument arriver à conclure sur les règles d'origine du coton, parce que c'est dans le coton, comme je vous l'ai montré, que nous trouvons la plus grande part des règles d'origine qui sont en suspens. Et il ne serait pas avantageux de démarrer les échanges sur la zone de libre-échange continentale sans pour autant arriver à à lever l'équivoque sur ce chapitre le plus important, qui peut permettre justement le développement de chaînes de valeur et permettre l'industrialisation de l'Afrique. Et si on arrive à conclure sur le chapitre 52 du coton, cela peut permettre de déverrouiller aussi les autres chapitres, les chapitres 61, 62 et 55, sur lesquels les pays producteurs de coton ont des prétentions. Et donc, en d'autres termes, on pourrait, les deux protagonistes, les producteurs du coton du chapitre 52 et les autres parties prenantes, c'est-à-dire les industriels du secteur du textile, peuvent arriver à un modus vivendi entre lever l'équivoque sur le coton du 52 et arriver aussi à lever l'équivoque sur les autres produits des chapitres 55, 61 et 62. Je dis et je vous remercie de votre attention. Je suis ouvert pour toute questions et clarifications possibles. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much to you, Didier Boniem, for providing us with that technical presentation on the complexity of the process. And what you have highlighted is we made a lot of progress. So 86.06% of the rules of origin or on tariff lines are agreed. So that's great. So we still have 13.94% of the rules of origin on the tariff lines for rules of origin that are outstanding. And the cotton, textile, apparel sector constitutes 10.5%, 10.54%. So a substantial amount of the outstanding tariff lines are in the cotton textile sector. That's why it's so important that we try to find a way of addressing this so that we can build convergence amongst the different members. So what we wanted to do in this session is try and get a better understanding of the different views of the member states and the different players on the rules of origin. And we would like to hear the views of please switch off your mics, those of you who are in the audience. Thank you so much. So I would like to call upon Josiah Rotish. Josiah is the chief negotiator from the Ministry of Trade and Industrialization of Kenya, and thank you so much for really coming forward. He's one of the negotiators, and whilst I'm introducing him, I'd really love to hear from others as well. So the other negotiators, I know there's a lot of you who are in the audience today. Just indicate perhaps with your, in the chat box that you would be keen to make a short input. It doesn't have to be prepared, but just to give us your insight about the current negotiations on cotton textiles and the rules of origin. And if you want to give us your country view or your perspective from the stakeholder you represent, that will be really great. We're just trying to get an understanding of what the differences are and perhaps explain to us why you have the view that you hold and if possible, how you think we can find a solution. Josiah, please go ahead and you can give us some insights from where you sit in the negotiations.
And thank you for all the presenters that has presented today, starting from the section one that we had presentation. I just wanted first of all to say something small about the presentation that were done. And I want to link it to what Didier, my brother from DRC, has presented. Didier has been my rapporteur for the longest time that I was chairing the technical working group on the rules of origin. So at least I agree with what he said. But now, just to say something about the presentation. The presentation that were given to us were very good in terms of moving forward. This is one sector that you will agree with me that it is extremely important sector in Africa, not only in Africa, in the rest of the world. But in terms of Africa, this sector is extremely critical. It is the same also for my country, Kenya. It is very, very critical in terms of the industrial development, in terms of the employment, in terms of bringing people out of poverty. It is very, very critical sector. So in terms of the presentation that were made, I think there are certain things that really were said, which will need a lot of digestion so that we close on this divergent views that we have been having in terms of concluding this sector. If you heard what Lydia said, it is out of the outstanding issues in the rules of origin, which is about 13% of the total. Textiles alone takes more than 11%. You realize that is a huge sector. The reason why it is like that, it is because different parts of Africa, they have got different interests, very, very serious ones. And of course, each of them has got a reason to have their view. I think I agree quite a lot in terms of what you said. The rules of origin alone is not going to answer the problems we have in the textile sector. It is not going to drive the sector. It is also not going to revive the sector for those countries that are trying to revive the sector like Kenya. Kenya is trying to revive this particular sector because of, you realize that because of the autonomous liberalization that took place in the 80s, which were actually being posted by the institutions that, you know, the industry collapsed. Let me just use that word. The industry collapsed totally, and it was a thriving industry in Kenya. So what Kenya is trying to do right now is trying to revive that particular sector, and there is quite a lot that is being done. Once that sector is revived, we want to move it to a level that we can say we will compete with the rest of the world. So I agree with what Dr. Kapkirwok, not Kapkirwok, Chekwati and others, that the rules of origin alone cannot be the answer. So we need the parallel, I call it parallel program in terms of your industrialization policies to make sure that you address the problems that has been identified in this particular sector. Because the rules of origin alone cannot answer anything. It is just going to facilitate as you try to do the things that you want to do in terms of supporting the sectors so that they can be competitive, supporting the sectors so that they can create employment, putting money as a government so that you make sure that this particular industry survive. You ought to have rules of origin that are not going to again frustrate it. So there are countries that have got vibrant textile industry, and there are others that are trying to revive it. And the others that are starting it from afresh. So I think the rules of origin that we need to adopt is the rule of origin that is going to allow all of us, those who are vibrant, those who are starting, those who are trying to revive, to make sure that we all survive. So that we answer the same, I mean, the very objective of the CFTA, because the main objective of the CFTA is to boost intra-African trade. Industrialization is one thing that will facilitate the production so that you get volumes, so that you get the right quality, so that you can also move towards product development. You produce a different kind of design that we don't have, and also you can embrace the technology that is right now there. But the main thing, the main objective was to push intra-African trade. What is it that we are going to sell? So if we cannot produce, we cannot sell. So I think that is where the industrialization is going to be very critical. But we must not forget about the main objective of the CFTA, and that is to boost intra-African trade. So I want to once again agree with the presentation that we must talk about the parallel agenda apart from the rules of origin. But we are saying as a country where we sit, and also as a person that has chaired the technical work group on rules of origin for about 3 years, I have understood what all the countries are saying in terms of their interests, which is quite genuine in all of them. So, but what we are saying is that let us move to adopt a rule that is not going to frustrate anything. Those who are starting, those who are reviving, and those who are also already vibrant in this particular industry. So as we move towards now addressing the outstanding matters in the rules of origin, I think this one should actually be at the back of our minds. I don't want to say, when I am a moderator, that the perspective of the industry in Kenya and also the Kenyan government, the simplified rules of origin, the single transformation, if I may say, is maybe what will answer, but rather what will allow all of us to move together. But we are not saying that we will continue staying here forever. If we continue staying here forever, we will never integrate vertically, because we will need to integrate vertically. But I think if we start with a single transformation, and within maybe 5 years, which is also recognized in the agreement itself, that we must do a review every 5 years. We do a review. So I think that review is the one that is going to say, okay, fine. If we are going to start with a single transformation within 5 years, or rather after 5 years, we do an assessment and see where are we. If we're able now to move to the next level and say we can now move to the second transformation level, or we can say that let us look at this, the entire spectrum of the textiles from chapter 50 to 63, which are the areas that we can move to the second level of transformation, and which are the areas that we can stay at the single level transformation. And as we move on, we can be doing that assessment continuously so that we can move together. Because I know there are so many other things, as I said, the parallel agenda. There are so many other things that are frustrating our industry. If you only focus on the rules of origin, and we maybe become so strict in terms of the rules of origin, double transformation, some countries may not be able to do so, but you will still be getting cheap products from outside the continent, from Asia, from America, from wherever. And we are not going to be answering the question that we are supposed to be answering, whether we need to be developing this sector in terms of producing more, in terms of creating employment. We will still be spending our money buying cheap products from outside Africa. So the best thing I think is just to relax the production, relax the rules of origin, do production. We capture this particular market in Africa, and we can actually push out the cheap products that are coming from outside Africa. Not to mention that there is also unfair trade. The products that are coming in, I don't want to say illegally, but they are not coming in, not exactly following the procedure. Some of the things that we need to address as countries, and that is part of the parallel agenda that I was talking about, which is supposed to be looked at by all of us. So that as we look at the rules of origin, we are sure that there is also another big agenda that we must address. So Chair, if I may just say in one sentence, the perspective of the textile industry in Kenya is that we move the simple transformation for now. After 5 years, we do an assessment. We can be doing an assessment continuously. We see where we are, whether we can move to the second level of transformation at that time for all the textile products, or we can see which one do we move and which one can we still relax. And then we can move in that manner. Other challenges that we can say is that we want to maybe buy cotton from Benin, from Burkina Faso, from Mali, from wherever. But maybe the infrastructure could be challenging. But those are the things that I think within 5 years will be addressed. That one I have a belief that they will be addressed, because we already have a very clear roadmap in terms of addressing the infrastructure. So within 5 years, when we are doing the assessment, some of those challenges will have already been addressed, or they will actually be at the very advanced level of addressing, so that we can say, okay, now you can move now all these raw materials in Africa without any problem in terms of the infrastructure. I think I can stop the moderator for now, and then I may come in if need be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, Josiah, thank you so much for giving us an overview as the chair of the technical group, but also, I think, for giving us the perspective of the...
Then the other thing is, I think also in terms of...
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much. So I was saying it's very valuable that you've given us a perspective, or an overall one, but also the views of the industry and the government of Kenya in the negotiations. let me hear and let's us all see if we can bring in a few other views from other participants in the negotiations, either negotiators or stakeholders, to just give us other perspectives on, is it single transformation review after 5 years? Will that be the view that will hold the consensus? Are there other interests and other views about how we deal with the rules of origin? And how do you think that's going to help us to also industrialize on the African continent? Yes, so Duduzile, would you like to come in? That would be great. I see Duduzile Mpanya, she's one of the negotiators. You may want to offer us a view from where you sit and some of your stakeholders.
Oh, thank you, Prof. Good afternoon. I'm Duduzile Mpanya from South Africa, Department of Trade and Industry. I'm also one of the, I won't say negotiator, one of the experts that are participating for rules of origin negotiations under the AfCFTA. First, I would like to thank the presenters who actually brought us a very interesting picture of what is happening with the textile and clothing sector within the continent, and also indicating key aspects of how the sector can develop or can work towards industrialization objectives of the continent and also of countries. And also they highlighted on the importance and in some areas why rules of origin can or cannot be able to support the industrializations that we need. I would just like to indicate that from South Africa's point of view, when it comes to rules of origin for textile and clothing, when we come of the rules of origin for textile and clothing, our position has also been that we need to adopt the rules of origin that will develop the continent. And the rules of origin that will ensure that value addition, adequate value addition is added in the continent. And as Mr. GDA, when was reflecting on the different views that are coming up from the negotiators in the AfCFTA, as well as what Mr. Rotich from Kenya also indicated, I think one thing that is differing within the negotiators is the starting point on this sector, where we should start. Because we have various positions, various interest parties, depending on the stakeholders that we represent. And we also acknowledge that this sector is a sector that actually cut across within the value chain, starting from agriculture until to the last level of the value chain, which is the fishing sector, the apparel side. So in trying to ensure that everyone within that value chain is catered for, from South Africa, we believe that the rules of origin that need to be adopted by the AfCFTA should ensure that you take that into consideration. And we still believe that the proposal that is coming out from what we have been discussing in the AfCFTA, that the member states or countries that are saying, let's first start with the flexible rules of origin, then move later to the more stringent rules of origin, will not take us to where we want to go. First of all, we have to recognize that there is existing capacity in the sector. There are industries that are already developing, especially from the textile side. And if we are going to allow the importation of textiles and importation of fabrics, what will happen to those sectors that already are in the sector? Of course, our sectors, they are struggling. They are not vibrant as usually they have to be. We saw from Dr. Mold's presentation that actually the sector in the 2000s has been taking a very serious knock. We're in the minus in terms of our trade balances. And that could result also by intention that we have been infiltrated by the cheap imports that are coming from the outside, mainly from the Far East, which are easier. Most of the apparel stakeholders are buying them rather than promoting or maybe in sourcing within the continent. So the AfCFTA for us as South Africa is an opportunity now to reflect or to correct what has been done by other agreements that have actually eroded Africa's ability or capability in developing this sector. So as we are going and mapping forward the way forward, I think that view would also need to be taken into consideration that although the flexible rules can be looked as the immediate solution, but it's not the desired solution that can also lead us to. Because we have seen that from other agreements, AGOA, we have seen that from other agreements, the GSPs that we have with other African countries, where actually those countries who are beneficiaries from the African side, they have not developed their sector. Actually, those agreements, they contributed to the downfall of those sectors. I think I will stop it at this point, Prof. And
thank you. Thank you very, very much to Duzile for sharing that insight and perspective from a South African perspective. That does help us. And I see the hand of Mark from Côte d'Ivoire. You have the floor, please proceed.
Merci beaucoup, professeur. Merci également pour avoir organisé cette séance qui est instructive. Nous voudrions nous appesantir dans notre communication, notre intervention sur le dernier intervenant. Nous voudrons souligner le fait que pour la partie ivoirienne, la définition et les négociations sur les règles d'origine ne sont pas une fin en soi. Les règles d'origine que nous sommes en train de négocier dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine doivent avoir pour objectif de stimuler la consommation du coton du continent africain et de stimuler également le commerce des produits et sous-produits du coton africain. Donc, ce sont ces aspects qui doivent être pris en compte. Définir des critères, des règles d'origine qui encouragent l'investissement dans le secteur cotonnier. Je pense qu'il faudrait que l'ensemble des pays africains partis à l'accord des zones de libre-échange en Afrique aient cela en vue. L'objectif, c'est stimuler le commerce intra-africain et le commerce entre l'Afrique et le reste du monde. En ce qui concerne le coton, quels sont les critères des règles d'origine qui pourraient nous permettre d'atteindre cet objectif? Donc, je pense que les uns et les autres doivent être flexibles, les règles d'origine n'étant pas une fin en soi, mais un moyen pour atteindre un but. Et ce but, c'est stimuler la production continentale. Voilà. Donc, nous encourageons les négociateurs à avoir cette perspective en vue, n'est-ce pas, et à adopter des positions qui puissent permettre la réalisation de cet objectif-là. Si nous avons des règles d'origine qui ne stimulent pas la consommation de la production locale, qui n'induisent pas l'industrialisation dans le domaine cotonnier, nous n'aurons pas fait notre travail. Donc, cet objectif ultime doit guider les négociations et à terme permettre d'adopter des règles d'origine, n'est-ce pas, définitivement. Il s'agit des règles d'origine préférentielles. Préférentielles pour qui? Pour la production, pour le consommateur et le producteur africain. Ce sont des règles d'origine préférentielles et pas non préférentielles. Donc, il y a une faveur. Bref, voici le commentaire que nous voulons faire à l'issue, n'est-ce pas, de tout ce que nous avons entendu. Et nous estimons qu'il faut que l'ensemble des négociateurs aient les mêmes perspectives. Et si nous avons les mêmes perspectives, nous allons alors trouver des moyens pour parvenir à des convergences de vues qui pourraient accélérer n'est-ce pas, les négociations et l'adoption définitive de toutes les règles d'origine en ce qui concerne le coton. Merci, monsieur le modérateur.
Thank you, Mark Loba. That was very helpful, very good insight. I see the hand of ETM. Please introduce yourself and please go ahead and make your point.
Thank you, Mr. Facilitator. I'm Edson Mazare from Zimbabwe.
Ah.
Yeah, I'm one of the experts. We have been participating in the negotiations on rules of origin. Yeah, firstly, I would like to thank the presenters for their insightful presentations. We know from their presentations that they share the divergent positions that have been expressed by the various member states in the negotiations. And we recognize the divergence positions on the table, and we are of the view that any compromise position should balance the interests and take into account the various positions that are being advanced by the member states in the different stages of development in the textile and clothing sector. We share the view expressed by some presenters that stringent rules on textiles and apparels will not be ideal for the current situation in Africa. From our experiences in the regional economic community rules, the stringent rule has failed to stimulate investment in these sectors. Over the last 20 years, not only have we seen the decimation of the textiles and clothing industries in most countries of the region, there's been no significant investment into most countries despite having stringent rules. The free trade areas in place failed the clothing and textile sectors because of the restrictive rules of origin, which prevented preferential access for a clothing sector, which needed to create demand for the textile sector. We have seen that the only countries to grow their sectors developed some of their clothing sector companies via preferential access to markets outside the continent, which have a single transformation rule of origin applying. Just to add, Mr. Facilitator, that some countries have attracted investment into textiles mills to supply their expanding clothing sectors. The clothing companies across the continent are forced to import even cotton fabrics to utilize in garment production, as the amounts made available locally are a fraction of what is needed. Let alone, there are about 90% of fabric tariff codes that are not even produced in Africa or the region and have to be imported to meet the customers' demands. There are far better ways to promote value addition within the continent, and the restrictive rules of origin do the opposite due to the low level of supply. They restrain trade in both sectors and therefore deter investments to some extent. We fully agree on the need to create employment within the continent. You will agree with me, Mr. Facilitator, that the clothing sector is the greatest full-time employer, as we have heard from one of the presenters in the chain, and will be the greatest driver of value addition if given the best access to markets. Because the majority of countries have all the necessary factors to be able to have a full cotton to clothing value chain, a performing cotton sector and a performing clothing sector will negate at least some of the negative investment factors that exist. And FDI investment can be attracted into the textile sector by commercial factors based on synergy and logistics. We must do something different if we expect a different outcome. Therefore, in the immediate future, we might need to adopt a flexible rule on textiles and clothing, which will be an ideal general rule to adopt in order to stimulate investment in these sectors. This will be subject to review with a view to adopt a more stringent rule. However, there is need to advance a stringent rule for some tariff lines which are mainly cotton-based in order to protect the local cotton farmers. Nevertheless, for some mixed fabrics and other materials not available in the continent, a flexible rule of origin could be adopted to allow sourcing of materials from efficient producers outside the continent. This is our view, Mr. Facilitator, for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very helpful and very clear articulation of your views. And this also helps us to understand the different groups and different views on the table. Does anyone else, any of the, you don't have to be a negotiator. If you're one of the stakeholders from industry or trade union, and you'd like to express a view on how you see the debate on the rules of origin, please feel free to just indicate, raise your hand, and it'll give you the floor to speak. No one else would like to add to the discussion?
Oui, le Gabon. Le Gabon.
Please go on.
Le Gabon.
Oui.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai des difficultés à demander la parole avec la machine. Bon, merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je voudrais remercier également les présentateurs, surtout notre frère Didier, qui s'est appesanti sur cette question et brillamment, qui nous a donné un peu l'état des lieux et les implications. Juste pour dire qu'effectivement, sur les négociations, les choses semblent piétiner. Piétiner, pourquoi? Parce que nous voyons encore des intérêts, je dirais, je ne peux pas dire des intérêts égoïstes, mais des intérêts qui surviennent, qui font en sorte que nous voyons que les pays ne sont pas au même niveau. Il y en a qui sont suffisamment développés dans le secteur et qui, effectivement, recourent à la matière première à l'extérieur du continent, et d'autres qui pensent qu'effectivement, nous devons, comme l'Afrique du Sud l'a mentionné, nous devons mettre l'accent sur la valorisation de notre produit local pour protéger effectivement ce secteur et pouvoir le développer, pourquoi pas. Et c'est ça l'objectif de la ZLECAf, l'industrialisation, la mise en place des chaînes de valeur, bien entendu, ceci pour la diversification. Cependant, lorsqu'on parle des règles d'origine, comme M. Didier l'a dit, effectivement, il faut penser que lorsque les partenaires de développement nous ont fait des présentations sur cette question, nous avons vu que l'Afrique a un déficit de, peut-être pas de production, c'est-à-dire qu'en même temps nous produisons, en même temps nous exportons. Et effectivement, la demande est aussi locale. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait faire? Puisque les industries sont en train de se mettre en place, il faut favoriser effectivement les règles d'origine flexibles. Mais la question qui se pose au niveau des négociations et que nous devons mettre en vue, c'est de savoir que si nous adoptons des règles d'origine flexible, il faudrait qu'on se donne du temps. Notre déficit fera en sorte que peut-être ces règles flexibles pourront aller au-delà de 10 ans, voire 20 ans, pour faire en sorte que les pays africains soient préparés non seulement pour la culture du coton, pour la mise en place des industries, donc des chaînes de valeur, afin d'avoir non seulement une production quantitative, mais de qualité. Il y a la mise en place, comme beaucoup l'ont souligné, l'industrialisation, disons la mécanisation, la digitalisation même du secteur, mais effectivement, cette période tampon peut nous permettre de valoriser, n'est-ce pas, nos productions et peut-être être compétitifs. J'ai écouté l'une des présentatrices qui parlait de la spécialisation. Effectivement, nous ne pouvons pas, parce que la tentation est grande, de tout faire à la fois. Non. Au moment où nous parlons de la ZLECAf, il faut spécialiser les pays. Il y a certains pays qui sont en avance dans la production, la culture du coton. D'autres peuvent se spécialiser dans la transformation de ce coton. Nous avons pris l'exemple de l'Éthiopie, qui est suffisamment en avance dans cette industrie, et d'autres pays pour la distribution. C'est vrai, nous avons aussi des problèmes logistiques, comme mon prédécesseur l'a souligné. Nous avons des problèmes de port, de transport, etc. Mais dans cette fourchette de temps que nous avons peut-être souligné, peut nous permettre, n'est-ce pas, de mettre en place ces structures qui vont nous permettre non seulement de produire, non seulement de transformer et de transporter, de distribuer. Donc, nous avons besoin de ce temps. Alors que dans les négociations, effectivement, je n'ai pas entendu peut-être qu'on l'a proposé, mais le temps qui est mis en exergue n'est pas suffisant pour permettre à nos pays de se préparer effectivement. Alors, je voudrais donc m'arrêter là pour dire qu'il y a des éléments endogènes qu'il faudrait mettre en place pour effectivement arriver à cette production à ces échanges que nous voulons dans le secteur du coton. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much to Gabon, Moni, Guillaume, Frank. That was very helpful, good insight. I have one more speaker, Aaron Banda. Please introduce yourself and you can make your points. You have 2 or 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Aaron Banda is my name, from Zambia. I'm a member of Zambia Institute of Trade Policy. In Zambia, it's a new institute. So I'm just interested in the presentation that have been done. And thank you very much, the presenters. Very insightful indeed. Yeah, just one concern or just one question. Maybe any of the presenters or the experts might share their experiences. The question is, to what degree of engagement do negotiators have with the private sector in as far as the negotiations of rules of origin take place now or from the inception? So how much engagement has been done? Because I asked that question, some private sectors, I'm sure will see that when the agreement is done or negotiations are done, there are those disputes that come immediately the transactions start taking place. So that's my question, or that's my line of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a very useful point. In fact, we did invite people from private sector institutions, stakeholders from industry associations, and indeed the trade unions who are active in many countries in formulation of trade policy to also participate. Is there anyone else? Perhaps we have one more before I pass the baton on to the discussant, Dr. Tefere Tespacho. Anyone else wants to make a point before I pass on to Tefere? So this gives us a good indication of there are different perspectives, different views, because there are different interests amongst the private sector and the trade unions in different countries. And if anyone in the room represents the industry or the trade unions, please raise your hand and you can join the conversation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lidati Rajmanjusri. I'm the director of the Mauritius Export Association. The chairman, as one of our colleagues just mentioned about private sector. So
yes,
completely from the private sector. And we regroup the textile and apparel producers and exporters of Mauritius. So we just some quick views. We've been involved together with the government in discussions at SADC level, AGOA level. So we are very much aware of discussions, negotiations on rules of origin on textile and apparel. I appreciate all the comments that have been here. We could sense the need for flexible rules of origin. We could sense the need to have more time, give us a more flexible rules of origin with more time. That's what I could hear from two of our earlier colleagues. But Chairman, I would like to seize the opportunity also to thank all the presenters. It was a very good presentation, high level of presentations. First time I could see that level of presentations. Trade statistics are extremely important to reflect the facts and the realities on the ground, so that we can take learned decisions for the betterment and growth of our textile and apparel sector of Africa entirely. Chairman, one proposal would be that if we could, in line with all the presentation made and stats that we are starting to get, it would be good to have a stock take of each country of the AfCFTA the strength in the textile value chain. Who are the cotton producers? Who are the textile one? Who are the supply chain is regrouped as follows: cotton producers, you've got your yarn, you've got your fabric, and you've got garment making. And these are the four main stages in the supply chain. So it would be good if we could have like a dashboard, and we could see in our membership what is the strength of each country in each of those stages. Because I remember just earlier, one of our colleagues said that one country cannot do it all. That's a collaborative approach. We need to work together. That's regional integration. And we, Mauritius, we believe in regional integration. We can make it happen if we maximize on the strengths of each other.
Yeah.
But for the time being, we really need to know who is good at what stage.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't think I have it. I have for some countries, but I don't have it for the entire AfCFTA membership.
Right. Oh, that's fabulous. Well, I'm so happy that you have joined the discussion, because we'd love to continue to work with you and other stakeholders on the continent. And the purpose of this research project is really to bring that information out where it's available. And luckily, we have some good researchers who've done some work.
Correct.
And in this area, Lindsay Whitaker, who's online, and she didn't have a chance to present all her work, but I have read quite a lot of her work. She's done some outstanding work on trying to build a picture of productive capacity. And she has done work on Mauritius and Madagascar, but also a number of other countries in Africa, including Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, and a few others. So we will continue with that work, but we'll get in touch with you directly. And I think we should try to continue with this roundtable discussion, but bring more of the private sector and other stakeholders into the conversation, and increasing our knowledge about the state of play of the whole value chain, as you say, the four different stages.
Kevin, my two last comment would be, one more stage that we need to add when we do that dashboard is that in terms of yarn spinning, we need also to know, we need to differentiate between cotton and non-cotton yarn. Because we know that we are strong in cotton, but in synthetic yarn, we're not that much strong, so that need to be factored in. And yes, my last point, when you mentioned private sector, I couldn't resist myself to say some words, but one of our colleagues earlier said the engagement with private sector. It's very important that we engage with them, because we, as policymakers, we take decisions, but it is the private sector who makes it happen. So if we take the wrong decisions, and the private sector cannot make it, it's a waste. It's a waste for everybody, for the entire continent. So it's very important that all our colleagues around the membership also touch base with the private sector to know the reality on the game, so that when we take a decision, it's for the best of the continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining, and we'll certainly follow up with you, and send us your details, your emails, and we'll follow up. I'd really like to pass on, because I know the time is running and we don't want to use too much of your time. But I think we've had a fabulous discussion so far. And I'm pleased that although we didn't have a lot of time to get too many presentations and inputs from different different negotiators and stakeholders, we've got a good flavor of the debate that's going on the African continent. And from the presentation on the rules of origin, negotiations, you could see the complexity of the negotiations that's taking place right now. So it's not easy for the negotiators. So this process is really trying to help them by putting on the table as much information as possible, the facts on the ground, so that they are armed with the necessary information to enable them to make the best decision for the continent. But I want to pass on to now our discussant who's been listening. He is the best person to really share his insights and comments, because he brings a vast amount of knowledge and experience in trade and industrialization. He's worked in the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development for many, many years, heading the division on Africa and least developed countries. He's held many senior positions in UNCTAD, advisor to the Secretary General, and he's also been on the ground working in Ethiopia on industrialization. So I want to hand over to Tefere Tesfacho to make your comments and share your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. That's really very generous introduction. I'm here actually as a non-expert. First of all, I wish to say thank you to you and the Mandela School for bringing together experts who have studied the sector, covering many countries, many enterprises, who know the industry inside out, and also, more importantly, negotiators who are on the front line of the ongoing discussion on rules of origin. I think it's been really educational. I've been taking notes. Of course, as a discussant, I wouldn't even dare try to summarize this rich discussion. Just simply want to say thank you. A couple of points. I think a consensus is emerging, since many people say it, so it's worth repeating, is that rules of origin may be important, but they're not the panacea for the sector's problem or Africa's industrialization. I think there is, we can say there is understanding and consensus on that. Linked to that, I think it's important what people highlighted, the importance of product capacity. At the end of the day, countries have to produce to be able to trade, and also removing any supply side constraints and trade facilitation and other important elements of trade are more critical than simply the rules. I think the second point related to that is the importance of this sector for most African countries, which explains why while rules of origin discussions that the DA has told us has advanced, but not in this area. And that shows you that it's really important for many African countries, although the sector is a different level of development in the continent, but it's really very important. Now, as you know, as a trade negotiator, you know that negotiations on rules of origin are generally, especially in the context of regional free trade agreements, are generally difficult and complex. But I think it will be even more challenging in the context of African continental free trade agreement, from what we've seen various interventions today alone, particularly in this sector because of its importance. So I think what makes the rules of origin negotiations in Africa more difficult is I think in the context of Africa, you need to consider multi-layered factors in designing the right type of AfCFTA rules of origin. The consensus that African countries need to achieve, I think it goes beyond the usual choice of making the rules either restrictive or less restrictive, single transformation or double transformation. I think it goes beyond that. It's about finding an inclusive rules of origin that meets multiple objectives. For example, let me highlight 2 or 3 of them. For example, and I need to understand this, the rule, I think it's important that the negotiators would have to decide what is it that they want out of the rules of origin. Because the role of rules of origin is multiple. First of all, it has trade policy. It's a trade policy instrument. It's used to encourage intra-regional trade or to ensure that the benefits of preferential market access remains within the regional FTA, or even to exclude third parties from preferential arrangement, or to ensure that transshipment doesn't happen. So it has a trade-focused policy aspect. But rules of origin can also be a very important industrial policy instrument by shaping the space in which regional value chains operate. These rules can be an effective policy instrument for enhancing value addition, as we've been talking, within the regional free trade area and as the drivers of industrialization. Although I think Lindsay had been raising interesting points that negotiators have to bear in mind, because her research findings show apparently that regional value chains are not necessarily the main drivers of industrialization. If I'm not mistaken, that was what Lindsay was saying, but the main driver usually of industrialization is global markets, for obvious reasons, scale and possibility of productivity and technological upgrading and so on. The industrial policy aspect of rules of origin may also need, as she pointed out, to factor the sustainability shift aspect that she was highlighting, or leapfrogging, and the necessity of recycling as a way forward in the 21st century. If rules of origin is intended as a way of encouraging regional value chains as a means of industrialization, then it will be designed somewhat differently than if you wanted just simply to promote trade among countries. That's why distinguishing exactly what is it that African countries expect from rules of origin, differentiating these different aspects of rules of origin is very important. The third component of rules of origin is that it could also be an instrument for investment promotion, to create scale, for example, and trade, create an environment conducive for investment in specific sectors, which is important. Again, Lindsay was saying that it's important leveraging foreign knowledge, as she put it, by linking with buyers and suppliers and with meeting buyers' needs. I think the Ethiopian case will be one. You design rules of origin in such a way that they encourage investment into, for example, the textile part of the value chains. So one needs to really decide what is it, where is the focus? Because as I said, the way you design will have impact on others. If you want to go for industrial development through value chains, you may need to make it restrictive a bit, double transformation, maybe triple. That, on the other hand, could be detrimental for trade, intra-regional trade. But if you want just to accelerate trade, you may go for single transformation to facilitate trade, and then perhaps the industrial agenda may be put aside. So knowing exactly what you wanted it for is very important. Another layer that African countries is going to be a challenge in advancing on this rules of origin in this sector is the heterogeneity of the African countries and the difference in the level of development among countries in the continent. Well, as you know, Africa is home to 33 of the 46 LDCs. These countries are LDCs for a reason. They suffer from serious structural impediments, limited product capacities, limited technological capabilities, low skill base, low development private sector, weak institutions, generally weak production capacity. They're sort of locked in a low value production system. For continent, if we want for continent-wide rules of origin to be inclusive, it will need to accommodate the concerns and aspirations of these countries as well, not only the ones that are relatively more advanced. Another component which needs to be seriously considered is the implementation issue. which unfortunately often is given less attention until it's too late. When rules of origin is being negotiated, nobody talks about implementation, but that's a very important component. For example, we don't want intra-Africa trade to be the route for transshipment, and transshipment will happen even if we have strict rules of origin, but you cannot implement the rules of origin or enforce it. Therefore, the capacities of countries to implement, monitor, enforce the agreed rules of origin is something I think from the beginning should be taken into consideration. Even if the rules of origin are sound and meet regional objectives, they will have less impact and may not prevent abuse of rules by a third party through transshipment, for example, if implementation capacities are limited. Monitoring of product origin, for example, is inadequate, or intra-regional coordination is weak. Anyway, finally, of course, another thing that needs to be looked into is obviously harmonization of the different rules of origin in various regs that are still operational to make the rules homogeneous across the continent. I think that's also something that's started, but should be accelerated as well. Let me stop there since time is a bit late, Faisal. But thank you very much for this opportunity to participate and learn from these discussions.
Well, thank you, Jafere. You have really summarized the discussion and added a lot of value. And as I thought you would, given your great depth of expertise and experience in trade and industrial policy. So Tefere, as I think I mentioned, is also a member of the Trade and Industrial Development Advisory Council of the AfCFTA. And it's such a pleasure to work with him. So I think Tefere has summed up the different roles of rules of origin. It's not a sharp instrument. It's a blunt instrument because it's not something that I think everyone mentioned, all the researchers also, and the research tells us it's not a silver bullet. So on its own, it's not that useful, but together with other policies, it can be a useful instrument, a tool of trade and industrial policy. In the first instance, it's clearly a trade defense instrument. In trade, we have something we call trade remedies. So the trade remedies is every country has a right to use these, like anti-dumping or countervailing. And these instruments are to prevent unfair trade, or they are instruments to protect you from unfair trade. And so something like transshipment, which is somebody just bringing in products from the outside and then using one country to then take advantage of the free trade market without adding any value, that's what we call transshipment. And so the rules of origin is an instrument to protect you from that. How do we get the balance right between trying to use it for that purpose, but not allow it to be so restrictive that those countries that are at a low level of development, least developed countries, as Tefere has pointed out, most countries in Africa are LDCs. So how do we make sure that they are not disadvantaged by the use of this instrument? And that's the balance that we have to strike. And if we do use it, how do we make it an instrument that really supports industrialization? But we do know that industrial policy, supply side support, including active investment promotion strategies to bring investors into the continent, this is the most important thing we have to do. And how we use the AfCFTA to do that is critical. So taken together, we'll have to then find an appropriate balance for the right rules of origin, or at least the best compromised, the best balanced rules of origin that will take into account all these conditions on the African continent. So this is a continuation of a discussion, but today we've really had, I think, new insights added to our discourse and dialogue. And I'm very pleased at the collaborative nature of this discourse and the willingness of everyone to share information, share their research with each one of us. So it empowers us all to make an informed decision. I do think that there will be a need for us to continue the conversation. And I thank Liloti from the private sector for giving us that insight about the real need for the private sector to understand better what the data is on trade, but also on production in each of these different segments of the value chain across the African continent. It'll help them to make decisions, but we do want to engage them as well in the course of these negotiations so that we make a considered decision in collaboration with the private sector, who after all are going to be the main beneficiaries and investors in the AfCFTA. So thank you very, very much to each one of you for participating in the webinar today. We've had more than 100 of you participating, and I'm pleased that we've had translation. Thank you to the AfCFTA Secretariat for partnering with us, with the Mandela School on this webinar. We will make sure that all the presentations are shared with all the participants, and we will continue to communicate with you. And if you have any suggestions to make about the next steps and how we could continue with this dialogue and build up the knowledge base of the Secretariat and the member states so that we could arm you and empower you to make the right decisions and to make it as soon as possible. Thank you very much to everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. And I'd like to thank finally all the organizers in the background, Penny and her team, for doing a fabulous job. So well done, and we shall see you soon.